She grabbed his wrist and hissed in Russian, "Bomb under the car." 2 guards flicked their eyes, caught. I ordered a sweep, sirens tore in, and the wand froze beneath the chassis. If the device is real, who planted the doubles? And why is a child the only one who heard the lullaby for murder? Nia Caldwell stood at the edge of the hotel's portico, tablet tucked against her dark green blouse, watching valets choreograph black cars and tuxedos into neat departures. The fundraiser had landed clean, pledges recorded, speeches on time, donors glowing. Still, a quiet itch pressed at the back of her neck, the kind she'd learned to trust on nights when everything sparkled. She'd clocked the kid 3 times, small, cornrows tight, purple t-shirt and jeans that didn't quite fit. Security nudged her off the line, the way hotels do with anyone who doesn't match the centerpieces. The girl kept floating back to the columns, eyes fixed not on the chandelier or the camera flashes, but on the man in the navy suit beside the open doors, Marko Vance, the oil and tech investor whose name made rooms behave. He spoke to his driver without looking up. He didn't speak to Nia at all. Men like him rarely did. The armored sedan eased into place. The driver stepped out, swung the rear door open.
Warm leather light pulled in the back seat like en invitation. The girl broke cover.
She slipped under Nia's outstretched hand, sprinted the last 3 steps, and clamped both of her small hands around Marko's wrist.
Nesad.
Nulatsi, she breathed, then louder, in a Russian that sliced the noise clean, Bomba pod mashinoi. The driver froze. 2 new guards near the door flicked their eyes at each other. Just a flash, just long enough for the girl to see what they meant to hide. "Sir, step back," Nia said, voice flat into her lapel mic as she pivoted between the child and the car.
Perimte. Valet stop. Everyone clear the land now.
"This is unnecessary," one guard started. "It's necessary," Marko cut in, gaze on the sedan, on the girl's white-knuckled grip. "No one touches that car." He didn't pull free. He didn't raise his voice. He let Nia's orders stand. The plaza heat turned brittle. Guests turned into an audience.
Fun rose like a second chandelier.
"What did you hear?" Nia asked the girl, steady but quick. "Russian," the girl said, swallowing. "Not clean Moscow. Rough. Military. They said the American would be gone by midnight. They said the device is ready." She darted a glance toward the kitchen access where the 2 guards had appeared earlier. "They said make sure he gets in." Bomb squad sirens rode a red thread through the street. Officers fanned out, tight and methodical. An ordnance tech slid under the chassis with a wand and something like a stethoscope for metal. He stopped. Hand up.
Tempo changed.
"Further back," the lead officer called. "Now." Nia moved the wedge, Marko, the girl, hotel staff, behind a stone column. Marko's driver stared at the pavement, pride curdling into something sour. The crowd rippled with a sound that wasn't quite fear and wasn't applause either. "There's a device," the officer said minutes later, voice clipped. "Sophisticated and well-placed." The cordon widened. The car turned from prop to crime scene. Marko crouched until he was eye level with the girl.
Как тебя зовут? What is your name?
"Zoya," she whispered. He said first in the formal, then softer. "Thank you." The words made Zoya flinch like a hand raised and then slowly lower again. A detective approached with a clipboard and a directive. "We'll need statements. Especially hers." "She's shaking in 7, Nia said. "Statements happen somewhere warm." "My penthouse," Marko said, already dialing.
10 minutes away.
"You can record there." "That's irregular," the detective tried. "So is a child who speaks the right dialect saving my life at the curb," Marko replied. "We do it there." Upstairs, the city curled around glass. Food appeared, then a pediatrician, then a robe too long in the sleeves. Nia ran a bath and held the hairdryer like a lighthouse while Zoya explained, between spoonfuls of soup, how the loading docks stayed lit at night and how kitchen workers traded her bread for directions or a joke in the right language. "Rostov grit," Zoya murmured when she calmed, pulling the blanket to her chin. "They said things the way soldiers say them." A social worker named Priya listened, looked at Nia, and made a decision that bent rules without breaking them. Emergency placement, on-site guardian, re-evaluate in the morning. Zoya stared at the carpet when the word group home came up and stopped breathing until it didn't. "We'll do this right tomorrow," Marko said, thumb smoothing a wrinkle from the robe's sleeve like it was something fragile that would crack if left alone. Not performative. Real. Nia left the hall light on. Tea steamed at 2 a.m. The building, which had been only steel and wealth an hour ago, learned how to be a house. Dawn erased the glass with gold. Zoya stood at the window, tiptoes pressed into the rug, tracing a line down to a coffee shop corner only she could see. I used to be there, she said. I didn't know people could be up here. Behind them, shopping bags thumped softly onto a chair. Practical clothes, not performative gifts. If sizes are wrong, we'll fix it, Marko said, not looking for credit. Nia caught Zoya watching the door like a thing might close on her if she blinked. And that was the moment the night became a story. If that gave you chills, hit subscribe now. This story is just getting louder. Drop your city and country in the comments so I know where you caught the warning from, and I'll shout out a few of you in the next chapter. Your location might even shape the next twist. Don't miss it. Let us begin. Morning sifted into the penthouse like flour, soft and glowing. The city below looked rinsed clean, a map Zoya traced with her fingertip on the glass. Nia watched her for a beat, bare feet on the rug, robe knotted twice, hair a storm of sleep, and felt the strange weightless sensation of a day with no checklist and all responsibility. Breakfast, Marko said from the kitchen, sleeves pushed to his forearms, a cautionary manual tucked under a flour bag like he'd been studying pancakes. I am capable of basic chemistry. You're capable of calling room service, Nia said, but she tied an apron on anyway and moved close enough to read the recipe upside down. The griddle popped, the batter sizzled, and Zoya's eyes followed each bubble as if keeping count might hold the world still. They ate in the nook where the windows bowed outward. Zoya lifted each pancake as if it might be a trick, then bit delicately, then, when nothing bad happened, faster. Marko poured syrup with surgeon care. Nia slid a plate toward her and tapped the side gently when the bites went too quick. Spakono, Nia said softly. Slow. Zoya looked up, testing the sound. Spakono, she repeated, tongue careful in her mouth. A new word on a safe morning. They made a small life immediately because small lives are how big ones hold. After breakfast came hair, Nia's hands learning the pattern of Zoya's braids, rhythm swinging between fingers and scalp. Zoya hummed a Russian cartoon theme under her breath as the screen flickered with bright animals announcing the days of the week. When the braid pulled, Zoya flinched, eyes flicking to the doorway, and Nia paused, palm on her shoulder waiting. Consent, then continue. Chess appeared when the dishes were done, a travel set from a drawer in the den that looked like it had been bought aspirationally and abandoned. Marko set pieces the way men set expectations and watched Zoya's hand hover over the knights. You know the horse? He asked. She said, placing it with gentle precision. He jumps like a fool. But he wins. Marko smiled into his tea. He does. By mid-morning, Priya Menon arrived with a tablet, soft-soled shoes, and the energy of a person who moved rules around to fit people rather than the other way. She took in the light, the folded blankets on the couch, the half-finished braid, the stacked plates. Her eyes landed last on Zoya, who pressed into Nia's side like a bird landing on a shoulder it had not expected to find. Zoya, Priya said, her voice a step lower, a hand held out and not rushed. I'm Priya. May I sit here? She gestured to the armchair. Zoya nodded. Priya sat. The visit unfolded like a careful dance. Priya walked the rooms with Nia, asked questions that were not traps, locks on windows, nightlights available, who was allowed to knock on which door. She spoke with Marko at the kitchen island, pen moving steadily across a form that looked like nothing and everything. Emergency placement authorization, 72 hours, on-site guardian of record, Nia Caldwell. Petition to foster, filed by Marko Vance with counsel attached. Ground rules, Priya said when they reconvened in the living room. Clear for everyone. She glanced at Zoya. You can add rules too. Nia nodded. Only Priya or Detective Alvarez can ask questions about last night, and only when Zoya wants. No press. No new people in the apartment unless Priya or Alvarez pre-clears. If Zoya says stop, we stop. Good, Priya said. School will wait. Medical exam today, gentle. Safety drills at nap time, lights stay on unless Zoya says off. She turned to Zoya. Anything you want to add? Zoya worked her mouth, eyes on her hands. If the hall is dark, she said, barely a sound, I can keep the bathroom light on. Yes, Nia said immediately. The bathroom light can be a moon. Priya smiled, wrote that down as if it were policy. Maybe, Nia thought, it should be. After Priya left, the day held. It held through the pediatrician's visit, weight chart low, bruises examined with the practiced neutrality of a person who knew not to call hurt by the wrong name. It held through Zoya's nap, the light in the bathroom, a small sun cupped in a doorway. It held through Nia's late afternoon audit of the building's security stack, a ritual she performed when the inside of her chest felt too full. She liked clean lines. She trusted documents less than she trusted glue. Marko watched her lay out folder after folder on the dining table, his phone face down for once, the city's pulse outside the glass. I have a team for this, he said. You had a team for last night, Nia said. I want to know which link failed. She was 2 contracts deep into vendor verification when something wrong winked from the pile, a subcontractor file too perfect, edges too straight. Nia ran her nail along the inside seam of the folder's back panel and found a small lift, the kind a careless assistant might leave if they'd added a pocket after the fact. She tugged. The panel peeled. Behind it, a plastic card lay flat and anonymous, a maintenance pass for the private garage with a signature that was hers. Cute, Nia said, not feeling cute. Marko moved closer. That's your name. And not my hand. She held it up to the light. The ink shimmered greedily. It gets someone into your garage without a scan. Whoever forged this wanted us to turn on each other. You think this is internal? He asked. I think your subcontractor's controller is married to a private banker who manages funds for your rival, Nia said, flipping to the background appendix she'd started at midnight when sleep hadn't come. And I think someone used that network to launder people onto your detail. Marko was quiet a long moment. When he spoke, the words came from somewhere lower. I had a brother. Nia set the pass down. She didn't look away. He was 23, Marko said, staring at the ceiling as if he could project a movie there and crawl inside it. In niche. A deal went bad and they made a point of it. Car rigged while he stopped to buy water. After that, I built walls. Layers of men whose hands would shake before mine did. I told myself it was how you survive. He looked at the forged pass. The walls didn't save him. They made me unavailable to anything else. Nia thought of the way his voice had changed when he'd thanked Zoya at the curb. She cracked something. He nodded once. I don't know if I'm grateful or terrified. Both is honest, Nia said. Let's keep you honest and alive. Detective Alvarez called while she was scanning and photographing the card. 2 updates, he said, voice in her ear as she opened the secure app. One of your new guards didn't come home last night. The other, we found him in a South Side warehouse. No wallet. No prints. Body is still warm enough to talk if we're fast. Zoya walked in on Nia's side of the conversation and froze at the word warehouse. Nia softened her face, cupped a hand over the phone. It's okay, she mouthed. There. Zoya nodded, a quick bob. The bathroom light was on though the sun was bright. Send me the contractor file, Alvarez said. And do not show your face at that warehouse. Wasn't planning to, Nia said, and meant it. I've got something you'll like. She photographed the forged pass and the seam it had been hidden behind, added a note about the banker spouse. After tea, the internet found them. It always does. A gossip site ran a grainy photo of Zoya's back, purple shirt and braids, captioned with the word angel in a font that made Nia's teeth hurt. Another post called her a fake and used a zoomed-in frame to circle nothing in particular. Comments bloomed, adoration with menus, hate with knives, people trying to adopt out loud through the screen. Nia killed every alert on every device in the apartment. We will not feed that, she said. What if they come here? Zoya asked, so quiet it barely moved the air. They won't get past the front desk, Nia said. And if they try, they'll meet the version of me that doesn't smile. She reached for the remote. On the TV, a cartoon pig counted to 10 in Russian, then giggled in Ukrainian as if to insist the world could be bilingual and gentle at once. Marko's phone vibrated, a message from PR asking if they should lean into the narrative. No, he texted back, then said aloud so Nia and Zoya could hear it too. We don't trade your life for my image. He looked at Zoya. You are not a photograph. The day began to slope toward dusk. They practiced a safety drill, Nia's voice calm as she walked them through where to stand when the alarm sounded, which elevator to ignore, which stairwell mattered. Zoya memorized like she ate, quick, then slower once she trusted she'd get to do it again. When the elevator locks engaged for the night, the apartment narrowed and widened in all the right places. Zoya woke from her nap with a gasp at some old dream and found Nia already at the edge of the bed with a night light cupped like a little moon. Nia said softly, "Little son." The word lifted the air. "Solnishko," Zoya repeated. She settled. They played a short game of chess before dinner. Zoya sacrificed a bishop for a position that made no sense and then sprung a knight with a laugh that surprised even her. "Fool horse," she said, triumphant. "Wins." Marko groaned at the board and grinned at the child. "You will be dangerous." Dinner was simple: soup, bread, the promise of something sweet if Zoya wanted it. She did not. She wanted the bathroom light to stay on through dessert. Nia made it a rule: the moonlight doesn't time out. The intercom sang at 9, a polite chime that never had bad news until it did. Nia checked the camera feed. A man in a charcoal suit stood at the front desk downstairs, posture even, eyes anxious in the way people make them when they're about to perform empathy. He had a delivery envelope in his hand. The name on it was Marko's. "It's him," the doorman said over the line, voice pitched low. "The rival executive. He says he wants to apologize. Police are with him." Nia met Marko's gaze across the room. He didn't blink. "Under supervision," the doorman added quickly. "They insisted." "Of course they did," Nia said. "Polite is a weapon too." Marko clicked the audio. "If he has something to say, he can say it tomorrow at precinct. Not here." The doorman relayed. The man in the suit nodded gravely and moved his mouth just enough for the camera to catch the shape of Russian diminutives as he turned his head to a figure just out of frame. Kroshka Malish, little one honey, soft words that did not belong to apologies. Zoya had drifted close to the screen without Nia noticing. She went rigid. "He says to make it look like grief," Zoya whispered, the syllables linting into English around the Russian bones. "He calls the operation a lullaby." Nia's stomach tightened into a fist. She watched the man's mouth around the edges of the police shoulder, read the shape of a condolence they intended to engineer. A pretty accident.
Assad inevitability.
Words that look like blankets and smother instead. "Record that," she told the doorman. "Keep him there while Detective Alvarez gets it in person." "Already on it," the doorman said, voice fierce with usefulness. Marko stood very still. It occurred to Nia that stillness had once been his brand. Now it was a sharpened choice. He looked at Zoya, at the way her hands had gone small inside themselves. "Tea?" he asked her, as if this were the only answer to a man downstairs who turned Russian endearments into orders. Zoya nodded, breath coming back in pieces. "Tea," she said. "And the bathroom moon." Nia set the kettle. She thought of paper walls and real doors, of panels that peeled back to reveal signatures that weren't hers, of walls that promised safety and let men inside to rearrange the furniture. When the water began to sing, the apartment felt like a house again. The night outside pressed its face to the glass and could not get in. "Tomorrow," Nia said, pouring, handing Zoya a cup with both palms under it. "We make better locks." "And better rules," Marko added. Zoya blew on her tea, eyes on the doorway, on the soft square of light that promised she didn't have to sleep in the dark to deserve morning. "And better listening," she said. "Especially that," Nia agreed. The intercom chimed again, this time with Alvarez's voice. "Hold tight," he said. "We've got what we need from your guest. I'll brief you in the morning. For now, keep the moon on." They did. And the apartment, which had learned to be a house, learned one more thing: how to refuse entry to beautifully phrased danger. Outside, the rival's suit blended with the lobby's marble. Inside, a child finished her tea, a man sat on the rug instead of the chair, and a woman who trusted glue and instincts both mapped the doors and decided which ones would never close again. The apology happened the way rehearsed tragedies do, on schedule under lights, with microphones catching only the parts meant to be heard. Detective Alvarez controlled the room, a neutral conference space at the precinct, glass walls that weren't really for privacy and a ceiling vent that hummed like a witness. 2 officers adjusted a vase of supermarket flowers no one would remember. Nia stood behind the one-way, arms folded tight to keep her body from trying to do what her mouth wasn't allowed to, end the scene early. Marko waited at the far end of the table, spine straight, wedding bandless hand relaxed on the grain. He'd shaved too close. It made the scar on his jaw more honest. The rival executive arrived with a sorrowful smile and 2 kinds of cologne. "Mr. Vance," he said into English, voice smooth as poured cream. "I asked to offer my condolences, privately and with respect."
No cameras.
"You brought 2, Alvarez said, gesturing to the pens tucked into the man's pocket. He nodded toward an officer, who disassembled one and pocketed the drive. "Honest mistake," the rival sighed. He sat, palms open, eyes wet. These events spiral. Emotions spiral. "I wanted to de-escalate." "Then de-escalate," Marko said, tone flat as a plumb line. They spoke for 20 minutes about safety in markets and the burden of visibility. The man apologized for confusion and staffing anomalies. He deplored instability. He pictured futures where competing firms could coexist without theatrics. It was all very kind and very empty. Between pleasantries, he raised his head just enough for his voice to slide beneath the English and into a murmur Alvarez's hidden mic could read, a line of Russian sweetened with diminutives Zoya had taught them to hate. He breathed to someone who wasn't in the room. Let grief finish him. In the shadow hall, Nia felt the hair along her arms lift as if the air had grown teeth. Zoya, watching with Priya from a quiet office down the corridor, narrowed her eyes. "He says, make it look like sorrow did it," she translated softly. "He says little one, as a code like always. He means the fixer." Alvarez didn't blink. He pushed a form across the table that said the opposite of what it looked like. "Sign here, acknowledging your cooperation." While the rival read, Alvarez texted his team one word, "warrants." The man signed with a flourish meant for newspapers. "I'm glad we could be civil," he said to Marko. "The last thing anyone needs is drama." "Then stop writing it," Marko said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The drama wrote itself, anyway. 2 days later the city tasted like rain it hadn't earned. Nia decided the afternoon would be ordinary on purpose. A second-hand bookstore a few blocks from Zoya's new school, a paper bag with cinnamon rolls still warm, a walk that taught the route by heart. Zoya wore a navy hoodie, braids tidied, hands nested in the pocket like small animals learning to sleep. Marko wanted to come. Nia said the air outside held too many eyes for him and promised a video call by the stacks. Rules. Nia quizzed, as they waited for the light. "Stay on your shadow," Zoya said, and stepped into the lane of sidewalk Nia's body cut against the sun. "Eyes up. If someone says my old name, I run to the blue awning and into the corner. I don't talk to men with apologies." "Or women," Nia said. "Misogyny doesn't own manipulation." Zoya grinned, a flicker of mischief like a candle in a storm. "You always ruin their plan." "Trying," Nia said. They were 3 doors from the shop when the gray sedan kissed the curb. It didn't screech. It didn't shout. It purred. A man leaned over the passenger seat, window down, face arranged into the smile you put on when you want a child not to run. He used Zoya's birth name the way priests use blessings and surgeons use sedatives. Zoya froze. The air narrowed, the sound of traffic fell far away, and the syllables dragged a net through her chest. Nia's hand found the inside of Zoya's elbow, gentle, firm. "Go," she said softly. "Blue awning." Zoya moved, not fast, not yet. Then the man said the word the rival had whispered in the precinct, the one that tasted like lullabies and meant the opposite. "Malish. Little one." Zoya ran. She pivoted into the funnel Nia had built from people and street and habit, past the florist where the buckets made a small wall, under the blue awning where a man pretending to read a newspaper was, in fact, a police officer with a radio in his sleeve, and into the corner triangle formed by 2 planters. The sedan's door cracked, a hand extended. A second man, a shadow peeled from a brick wall, stepped to intercept. Plain clothes folded in. A white van pulled to block, its side door sliding open on silence. The fixer, older than the file photo, thinner, eyes like burnt glass, saw the trap a second before it closed. He didn't fight. He let inertia take him backward and slipped through the tiniest gap that existed between a woman with a stroller and the human instinct to apologize for being in the way. He was gone. But he left a voicemail that hit Alvarez's phone before the van door clicked. Your man wants it neat, the voice said in Russian, breath scraping the microphone like a blade nicking bone. Grief, not gasoline. Delay 2 weeks. Use the stairwell at the gala center. He hates stairwells. Chain of command, confirmed. The block held its breath, then exhaled into its life again. People pretended they hadn't seen the bad thing almost happen because the good thing did. Zoya squeezed under the awning, pressing her face into Nia's side. The cinnamon rolls went sweet and metallic in Nia's mouth. You did perfect, Nia murmured into the crown of Zoya's head. Textbook. Zoya nodded, trembling the way buildings do after the earthquake when no one can see it. I heard him say the lullaby word, she whispered. It made my knees slow. Nia stroked her braid. That's why we train for slow knees. News outran them home. By the time the elevator slid open onto the penthouse, public outrage had spiked into something sharp enough to pierce narrative armor. The city didn't like children made into bait. The city recognized a car that lingered exactly wrong. The city's anger, for once, flowed in a helpful direction. Inside, the apartment shifted into siege protocol. Panic room drills grew muscle memory. Elevator locks engaged on a schedule Nia controlled. Drivers had last names, references, and hands that held the steering wheel like a promise. Zoya's nights regressed. She woke to tile patterns and a metal taste and the sound boots make when the hallway is too long. Nia sat on the rug with a night light cupped in her palm like a small moon. Marko learned to be present instead of useful. Tea at 2, listening at 3, silence at 4. They built a truce with the dark one ritual at a time. On the 5th evening after the bookstore, a man named Lev arrived at the service entrance with a heartbeat that couldn't decide between flight and confession. He wore the sort of gray that disappears into offices, and the kind of expression that begged not to be named a whistleblower because the word was too loud. I shouldn't be here, he said before the door even closed. Then tell me why you are, Nia said, stepping him into the kitchen where the tile could be mopped of whatever bled from papers. Lev set a ledger on the island. It was ordinary as bread, ruled lines, date columns, handwriting that looked like a person trying to be neat because life had been messy. Alvarez, invited by a text and the promise of coffee, ran a finger down the margin. Shipments, Lev said, tapping IDs that braided through companies like rivers looking for a sea. Cash drops. The controller at the subcontractor signs here, he pointed, and then the banker spouse at Custon Capital makes it clean. The fixer sends a flower arrangement to mark the day. There's a petal taped there. He peeled up a corner and exposed a brittle sliver pressed like a preserved breath. White lily. Every time. Why now? Marko asked. Lev's eyes shot to Nia's, then to the hall where Zoya's laughter was a memory stored in the carpet. Because I saw the footage, he said. Because I have a niece who wears a purple hoodie, and because I knew I would grow into the kind of man my mother wouldn't look at if I didn't stop. He swallowed. I want out. Not a deal. A door. We can give you a door, Alvarez said. We can't give you a guarantee. I'll take a door, Lev said. He signed the statement line without being asked. The pen shook on the last letter and then stopped. The ledger linked the controller to the banker to the rival to the fixer to the word that had almost stolen Zoya from a sidewalk. It linked the paper walls to the real doors. It linked everything to everything in a way that would either save them or kill them faster. Marko stared at the ink until the numbers blurred. When he looked up, the expression on his face wasn't gravitas, it was gratitude weaponized. No cameras, he said. But microphones. Tomorrow. Tomorrow? Alvarez asked. Marko nodded. I have a press conference scheduled about a merger. He glanced at Nia. It's about something else now. The podium faced a snake of lenses and a row of chairs that tried to look like civility. PR hissed about optics. Security murmured about exposure. Zoya watched from a livestream Priya set up in a quiet room 2 floors below, thumb anchored on the edge of the tablet like she could keep the signal from falling. Marko walked to the mic with the ledger's weight in his pocket and a different weight in his chest. He didn't clear his throat, he cleared the room. I meant to talk about energy, he began. But a child changed the subject. He told the truth the way you tell a story you want people to hold without dropping. A girl who listened, a car that hummed wrong, a device under the night. He didn't name Zoya. He named what she deserved. He said, a child saved me because we did not save her sooner. He said, No child should have to learn a dialect to eat. He said, "We are building structures so no one has to choose between hunger and heroism." Then he did something billionaires rarely do. He gave away the shape of his power. Budget, $50 million in year 1. Timeline, 90 days to open the first site. Scope, housing, trauma-informed schooling, legal advocacy, language labs. Name, the Zoya Initiative, because names anchor promises. He stepped back. Nia stepped up. She spoke like a person who trusts glue and patterns and the exact number of seconds it takes to get from the lobby to the safe door. "Listen first," she said. "Always. Then feed. Then documents. Then doors that open and close when children say so." She laid out intake procedures, vetting processes, the nightlight policy she'd put into Priya's form half joke, half law. She said, "Transparency is security," and meant it both ways. A reporter rose, sharp. "Are you exploiting a child for PR?" "No," Nia said. "We're leveraging your attention for systems." "You can quote that." Alvarez, at the back, checked his phone, warrants moving, arrests timed like music. The rival watched from somewhere expensive and texted the fixer, "Grief is failing." The fixer replied with a picture of a stairwell and a time. Donations hit the site before the live stream ended. Small ones like notes slipped under a door. Big ones like the kind of apology you make with a number when you don't know what else to do. Volunteers offered language skills from 5 boroughs away. A grandmother in Queens messaged to say she had nightlights if they needed them. A kid in Brighton Beach sent a voice memo pronouncing the days of the week in Russian because the pig on the cartoon was wrong on Wednesday. Threats mutated, too. Clever emails with bad grammar pretending to be good grammar. Anonymous posts about foreign children. Someone mailed a white lily with a broken stem to the building, like subtlety would earn redemption. They brewed tea at 2 a.m. anyway. The apartment smelled like citrus and something green. Zoya tucked her feet under her and watched the steam turn ghosts into nothing. She whispered, testing the shape of it, "Home." She said it again in English, softer. "Home." Marko reached for the kettle. Nia flicked the hallway switch so the bathroom moon would glow just right down the corridor. Outside, the city tried to decide whether to be cruel or kind. Inside, a family made the deciding unnecessary. The mission had moved from the curb to the ledger to the mic. Now it settled into muscle. They would hold the door open for others. They would stand between apology and lullaby. They would let nightlights count as policy. Zoya sipped. The tea cooled. The storm that had been building since the car purred up to a curb 2 weeks ago rolled its shoulders over the river. "We're ready," Nia said, not to the storm. To the morning. Morning lit the courthouse like a promise and a dare. The hallway smelled faintly of paper and old coffee, a scent that had learned to carry grief without spilling it. Nia smoothed Zoya's sleeve and checked the bathroom moon app she'd hacked into a courthouse setting. If Zoya needed to step out, a restroom down the hall would glow her preferred soft square of light. Marko stood beside them in a suit that didn't try too hard, hands empty on purpose. Priya found them with a folder hugged to her chest and a smile that made bureaucracy look briefly human. "We'll keep this simple," she said. "Truth travels lighter." The courtroom itself was small, the kind with wood that creaked to remind you it had seen years and verdicts and the shape of names as they changed. The judge wore reading glasses low and a patience that could have been mistaken for boredom by anyone who hadn't brought a child into the room. Priya testified first. She didn't perform. She didn't need to. "Lived care," she said, clearing her throat when the phrase lodged. "The home is safe. The routines are stable. The child's voice is heard and obeyed. The guardian on record, Ms. Caldwell, demonstrates consistent attunement. The petitioner, Mr. Vance, demonstrates presence without performative excess." She let the ledger of her observations close on the word presence like the period it was. The judge looked over his glasses at Nia. "Guardian for now," he said. "This was not your plan." "No," Nia said. "It was the right thing when we reached the curb. It still is." Marko's turn. He didn't mention money. He didn't mention buildings or names that bent rooms. "I learned to sit on the rug," he said. "To put a kettle on before advice. I learned that safety is a practice, not a purchase." "Your schedule?" the judge asked. "I canceled it," Marko said, and when a courtroom chuckle snuck in, he added, Not for show. For a child. The judge nodded to Zoya. You don't have to speak, he said, voice soft enough to stack blankets. But if you want to tell me anything, I will listen. Zoya stood because Nia stood with her, just a little, just enough to feel the same air. She glanced at the bathroom door, at the soft square of applet glow, and then back at the judge. Her voice was small but not fragile. Home is where they listen, she said. She licked her lip, tried a smile on, and kept it. They listen. The judge didn't smile. He let his face do something quieter. Emergency foster extended, he said, gavel not required. 3 months with review in 30 days. Path to adoption to be evaluated and from what I can hear, prepared. A tremor ran through the room, relief skating along wood. Zoya exhaled a breath she'd been holding since the curb and leaned sideways into Nia's hip as if docking. Marko's eyes went bright in a way that didn't spill. After, the hallway widened like a road. They stepped into it with new papers and old habits. Priya squeezed Nia's shoulder. Now comes the part where ordinary is work, she said. You're built for it. Ordinary arrived in the shape of a school door with a small sign that said, Welcome at your pace. The trauma-informed program sat in a brick building that had remembered how to be kind. Carpets were soft without being precious. Windows were low enough for small bodies to see out. The bathroom lights ran on a dimmer that answered to children's hands. Zoya's first day wasn't a ceremony, it was a sequence. A speech therapist with gentle vowels introduced herself and then waited. A language tutor with a bun like a fortress set Russian and English and a splash of Ukrainian on a table like cups of water to sip as needed. At lunch, a boy with eyes like locked doors hovered near a trash can, tray in hand. Zoya watched his body the way she watched chessboards. Here, she said to him in Russian, then in careful English, then in a Ukrainian that had been polished by cartoons. Sit with me. The noodles are better if you count while you eat. She counted quietly to 10. He sat. Nia spent the morning with the principal and an operations map in her head. She plotted pickup routes that avoided alleys, cameras that weren't intrusive and weren't off, a policy that made bathroom moons a line item. Marko learned drop-off, not the showy part where men kiss heads and wave, but the small exchange of trust at a door staffed by people who knew which names to say and which to wait for. Between school bells, the outside world practiced the opposite of kindness. Warrants landed like clean knives. The banker's spouse turned her face away from cameras as she walked into a building where names get sorted into felonies and deals. The fixer, recorded again on a phone that didn't love him back, murmured a stairwell plan into a room with a microphone in the lamp. Lev's ledger went from island to evidence table to a judge's face, the Cyrillic columns acquiring the gravity of things that move men in suits from their desks to their knees. A politician whose speeches always had the word order near the top found his name braided into the controller's signature and the banker's calendar. He called it a misunderstanding of philanthropy. The public called it what it was. The tide turned. It carried lilies with broken stems out to sea. Inside the apartment, they did the unglamorous work of love with boundaries. Nia and Marko had a conversation at the kitchen island in low tones, while Zoya did homework that was really play and play that was really therapy. Child first, Nia said. Feelings second. Not feelings never. Agreed, Marko said, thumb worrying the edge of a T-tag. I have inclinations. He grimaced. That is the worst word. It's the right one, Nia said. We name things so they don't hunt us later. He nodded. I am learning patience. I am willing to be told to slow down even when I think I am already slow. You've improved, Nia said, and let her shoulder brushes just once, like a punctuation mark you save for emphasis. That night, after toothbrushing and the moonlight check and the part where Zoya insisted on placing the chess knights in the middle of the living room, so they can guard the hallway, she stood in the doorway in her long robe and tested a word against the wall. Tata, she said, almost not a sound. Nia didn't move. She learned early that some words had to land without an audience applauding them into panic. Marko, kneeling to plug in the night light like he was wiring a planet, paused. You can take it back any time, he said quietly, turning just enough to show face without grabbing eye contact. You can also keep it. Zoya nodded and retreated as if the word were a shy animal that needed to be coaxed with tea and quiet. Nia found the sink and pretended to wash a cup that was already clean until her eyes finished doing what they needed to do. By the end of the week, The initiative had a shape that wasn't a press release. Rapid rehousing units opened in a refurbished building that had once been luxury and now tried being decent. Language labs ran with morning sessions for adults and afternoon play tutor hours where kids taught one another slang and grammar with the ferocity of experts. Zoya stood in the doorway of the lab with a seriousness that made grown staff stand straighter. Kids should get fellowships, she said to Nia and the program director, hands on hips. Money for translating. For being brave and tired. They can teach. They know the words that go under the words. The director blinked. Paid peer translators? Yes, Zoya said. A badge. And snacks. Absolutely snacks, Nia said. And stipends. She wrote it into the budget with a line that would face audit and approval and be worth every meeting. The legal clinic launched quietly and loudly at once. A quiet room with warm lamps and loud outcomes measured in documents secured and threats defanged. Priya ran point with a team of attorneys who had learned not to center their egos when a child's patience was thinner than their patience with forms. Arrests rolled like a slow drumbeat. The rival executive, once so polished he squeaked, found his calendar thinning. Investors moved their money to places where lullabies weren't code. The fixer's face appeared on a screen and then briefly, on a bench in a holding cell where he stared at his hands like they might translate him out of consequences. They didn't. In the evenings, normalcy didn't require performance, it required repetition. School forms signed. Kettle boiled. The chess knights kept their hallway post like small sentries made of ritual. Marko learned to be the driver who took the long way when the short way felt thin. Nia learned the names of the kids who taught her which vocabulary made cafeteria lines less like borders. One night the roof remembered it was a place where air could rinse fear from hair. They went up when the building was quiet, a blanket, 2 mugs, the city around them like circuitry gone soft. Zoya tucked herself by the planted lavender, where the bees would be in July, counting the blinking planes like a game that didn't need to be won. Marko watched her, then looked at Nia the way you look at someone when you're about to move a piece you've been lining up for weeks. Should we formalize what we already are? He asked. He didn't reach for her hand. He let the question stand on its own feet. Only if Zoya says yes, Nia said. It wasn't an out. It was the axis. A tiny intake of breath from the doorway. Zoya had padded up in socks, holding a chess knight in one hand and a cookie in the other, the guardian of hallways and rooflines both. She considered the adults with a gravity the knight respected. Duh, she said first, because Russian had been her net and deserved to be honored. Tak, she added, letting Ukrainian nod. Then softly yes. She set the knight down like a stamp on a document and launched herself into both of them at once, a bare hug that reordered the skyline inside 3 chests. The city kept breathing. The kettle would sing again in an hour. Downstairs, the bathroom moon glowed, a policy and a love letter. On the roof, a family answered in 3 languages and 1 embrace, while a world that had watched them for spectacle began, reluctantly, to listen. They booked the room for an energy deal. They got a reckoning. Marko stepped to the podium with the ledger's weight translated into posture. Nia stood a half step to his left, not decoration, not shadow. Zoya watched from the wings with Priya, a hand on the curtain and the other around a paper cup of tea, her knight tucked in her hoodie pocket like a private tradition. Thank you for coming, Marko began.
Nostro ad clearing, no slide deck.
We plan to discuss supply and markets. We're here to discuss responsibility. He told it cleanly this time, stripped of metaphor, a forged pass, a device under a car, a lullaby turned into a weapon. A child saved me, he said, as if the words were bricks he could lay into a path. We owe her, and those like her, more than gratitude. He turned the mic to Nia. She didn't rehearse, she reiterated. Listening is policy, she said. Tea at 2 a.m. is presence codified. Night lights are consent. And we will budget for everyone. On the back wall, a screen lit up with a seal and the words, Exhibit A. Detective Alvarez's voice came over the room speakers, steady and unhurried. We're releasing portions of the ledger and tapes because the public interest is immediate. Columns appeared, dates, shipments, signatures in Cyrillic, and a sliver of audio played, the rival's voice in English de-escalating, then in Russian soft and poisonous. Let grief finish him. A ripple moved through the press like a wind changing direction. A live feed split screen to the rival at his office, flanked by counsel, performing outrage. The camera had barely settled when the door behind him opened and two marshals entered, careful and polite as waiters. "Sir," one said. "Warrant." On the other split screen, a customs booth flickered into view. A man in a knit cap, eyes burned to glass, handed over a passport with a practiced shrug of someone who had been told all his life that borders were favors. A second guard stepped in. "Please come with us." The fixer's jaw ticked once, a chess piece realizing the game had always been bigger than the board. Detained. The room, the city, the country exhaled a long-held breath and inhaled something like relief and like consequence. Marko didn't smile. He nodded once, not to the cameras but to the people who would sleep a little longer tonight because men who called murder lullabies had to practice their euphemisms somewhere else now. Questions tried to clamor. Nia answered the ones that were systems. She refused the ones that were spectacle. "No," she said, to a request to name Zoya. "Yes," she said, to a question about the budget and oversight. "Transparency is our lock." When it ended, the room didn't empty, it softened. Alvarez met them in the hall with a grin he let touch his eyes for once. "Live arrests," he said. "I don't love theater, but sometimes it loves us." "Only if the next act is legislation," Nia said. "Already drafting," he replied, and he was. That evening, the city hummed like a benediction under their roof. They set a small table near the lavender planters. String lights drew a soft constellation over 3 chairs. Priya came up for 15 minutes to say, "I can't stay," and then stayed 27, officiating without the robe and with the authority of someone who had filed the right forms and held the right hands. "This is not a wedding," Nia had insisted, practical even in joy. "This is a vow ceremony. Child-centered." "Then let the child center it," Priya said. Zoya did. She wore her navy hoodie over a dress with pockets, because a person should be able to carry things and twirl. She slid 2 thin bands onto adult hands, simple bands, weight like promises, not like armor. "Listen," she said, and her voice made the string lights brighter. "Notice. Make tea when it's dark." She looked at Nia. "Mama, don't work while I talk." She looked at Marko. "Tata, don't go to the office when the moon is on." "I won't," he said, and meant it. Nia's vow was a blueprint. "I'll keep doors that open and close when you say. I'll braid your hair and the calendar both. I'll fight loudly and love quietly unless you need it loud." Marko's vow was a practice. "I'll sit on the rug. I'll be early for drop-off and late for nothing else. I'll boil water first, answer later." The city hummed below like approval you didn't have to earn. Somewhere, a siren threaded a red note into the night and moved on. The adoption path curved the next weeks into scenes where love had to fit inside forms. Final home study visits measured not square footage but softness. The nightlight glow, the reachable shelves, the way shoes organized near a door so a small person could leave quickly if she needed to and slowly if she wanted to. Zoya's room grew into itself, a nightlight like a small moon. Books in English and Russian and Ukrainian stacked into piles that made their own neighborhoods. A chess set with knights that saw hallway duty at night and studied gambits by day. A social worker asked Zoya if she wanted to display her new last name on the door. Zoya frowned, thinking like a linguist. Maybe a plaque with 3 words, she decided. Zoya. Home. Listening. The worker wrote it down as if procurement could handle that. The judge's signature, ink on a line that could move a life from provisional to permanent, waited at the end of a corridor they walked together. Whether you call it imminent or completed depends on where you like your endings to land. What mattered more was the way Zoya slept the night the court date appeared on the calendar. She woke only once. Nia brought the nightlight to the door's edge without entering, a little moon, a tiny sun. Marko made tea he didn't drink, because ritual matters even when you are alone in a kitchen at 2 a.m. By the time the initiative's first center opened, they had learned the pattern of ribbon cuttings that didn't perform. No giant scissors. No stage. An open door. Kitchens that never closed. Dorm wings with warm lamps that obeyed hands no taller than the doorknobs. A sign at the entrance said welcome in a scatter of alphabets: Cyrillic, Latin, Devanagari, Arabic, Hebrew, Hangul, Amharic, voices of a city layered like sediment. Zoya stood on the threshold in sneakers and a badge that said Translation Fellow. She adjusted the lanyard the way people adjust names when they fit. She said first, to honor an origin. Next, because Ukrainian had been her bridge to cartoons and then to jokes. Bienvenidos, because kids on her block had taught her fast. Welcome, she finished, an English that had softened its edges to make room for others. Cameras watched. She stared back with a steady that had nothing to prove. Inside, the language lab hum was a frequency you could breathe. Pier tables marked by flags and snacks. A board of idioms that grew more beautiful when mistranslated. The legal clinic had a basket of nightlights near the intake desk and a form where children could check a box that said I need the moon on during my appointment. Lev, bearded now and looking like a man growing into his exit, stood by a corkboard that mapped supply lines of help instead of harm. He pointed to arrows with pride that didn't require credit. Alvarez walked through once, nodded at the kitchen, and left before anyone could say speech. Priya's laugh carried down the hall like a place to sit. The public tide that had surged in anger turned into a current that could carry projects. Donations continued, not as spikes but as sustenance. Volunteers learned to show up on time and leave when told. A council of teenagers met on Tuesdays and rewrote the rules every month, as they should. That night, thunder rolled over the river like furniture moved in a room above you. Zoya woke before the flash, tuned to storm dialect. She sat up, heart thudding with an old rhythm. Nia appeared in the doorway with the night light in her hands, a domestic lighthouse. She didn't turn it on without asking.
May I?
Yes, Zoya said. The moon clicked alive. The storm's mouth closed a little. Marko's footsteps were a cadence the apartment had memorized. He didn't speak until the kettle found its song. Then he knelt by the bed, not too close. Mint or chamomile? He asked, as if the difference mattered and mattered enough to be chosen. Chamomile, Zoya said. She took the cup with both hands, careful, practiced. Mama, she tried, the syllable lighter than it would have been months ago, heavier than it had been as a wish. Ta-ta. The words didn't echo. They settled. They breathed together the way people do when they've decided to be a house rather than a fortress. In, out, in, out. The storm moved over them like a sermon that forgot its point and wandered off. The bathroom moon glowed a policy into the night. Morning found the city in gold again, rinsed and remade. 3 silhouettes stood at the window, one tall, one a half head shorter, one with braids tickling her shoulders, looking down at a route to school that now included a stop at a center with a door that never locked to the right knock. Chess pieces waited on the hallway table, night smug from an uneventful night. A calendar held a court date with an arrow drawn by a small hand. The kettle stood ready for the next ritual, the next presence. On the fridge, a paper in 3 alphabets said listening like a title deed. The voice of the story, which had been a warning at a curb, then a plan, then a press conference, then a vow, settled where it belonged, on a door that had locked once and now stayed open. For them. For the kid who would knock next. For the ones who didn't yet know which language to ask in, and didn't need to, because someone had decided to hear before they were fluent.